Hello, welcome back to another evening of shared stories and adventures. Tonight, we're diving headfirst into the absolute madness that is Stranger Things Season 5 theories. I'll be covering all the wildest, most insane, most stay up till 3 a.m. thinking about them predictions for Volume 2 and the finale. And honestly, with Volume 1 dropping just last week, the internet has been absolutely losing its mind with speculation. So we'll start with the biggest reveal from Volume 1, Will's powers, and then move into theories about who's really controlling the Upside Down, whether Max will wake up, who's going to die, and whether Eddie Munson could possibly return. Then we've got D&D monster theories, Vecna's master plan, the mysterious significance of November 6th, and loads more wild speculation. There's definitely more than enough to keep us busy tonight, and probably enough to fuel your dreams or nightmares. Now, plenty to get talking about, but if you like what I do here and want a way to support the channel, consider subscribing down below. These theory videos take ages to research, and I really appreciate it. But for now, grab your walkie-talkie and flashlight, get cozy in the Upside Down, and let's begin. So let's start with the absolute biggest reveal from Volume 1. The one that had fans screaming at their screens and spamming social media the second episode 4 ended. Will Byers finally has powers, proper, full-blown, nosebleed-inducing, Demogorgon-exploding powers. And I'm not going to lie, I've been waiting for this moment since Season 2. The way they revealed it was absolutely brilliant too. Volume 1 opens with a flashback that we've technically seen before, but not like this. We're back in November 1983, inside Castle Byers, watching young Will hide from the Demogorgon. The creature drags him through the Upside Down, knocks him unconscious, and takes him to the library. This much we knew. But what happens next is brand new information, and it changes everything we thought we understood about Will's connection to the Upside Down. Vecna appears, not the Demogorgon acting alone, but Vecna himself, deliberately selecting Will. He forces a tendril down Will's throat, the same way we saw him do to the other kids in Volume 1, connecting Will to the hive mind and physically altering his body with particles from the Upside Down. This is called flaying, and it's the exact same process that gave Vecna his own powers when he was a child. Now this raises loads of questions, obviously. Why Will specifically? Why was he the first? We'll get into those theories later. But what matters right now is understanding what this flaying actually did to Will, and why his powers are only showing up now, years later. For 3.5 seasons, Will's been dealing with the aftermath of that possession. The visions in Season 2, the mind flayer controlling him, the neck tingle whenever the Upside Down is near. We've watched him struggle with this connection, feeling like he's broken or cursed, but Volume 1 reframes all of that. Those weren't just symptoms of trauma, they were signs that Will had been changed on a fundamental level, that he'd been given something he didn't know how to access. The turning point comes in Episode 4, titled Sorcerer, which is perfect given Will's Dungeons & Dragons character. The military base is under attack, Vecna's forces are overwhelming the soldiers, and elsewhere, Robin and Murray are trying to evacuate kids whilst being chased by Demogorgons. It's absolute chaos. Will can see through the creature's eyes because of his hive mind connection, and he's having what looks like a seizure from the psychic feedback. Everyone thinks he's dying. Then Robin, bless her, gives him this speech about self-acceptance and believing in yourself even when the world tells you you're not enough. It's the kind of pep talk that would feel cheesy in literally any other show, but Maya Hawke sells it completely, and more importantly, it works. Will stops fighting the connection and instead leans into it. He realizes something absolutely massive. When Vecna flayed him, when Vecna put those particles inside him, he didn't just create a spy. He accidentally gave Will access to the same power he uses to control the hive mind. Will lifts his head, and you can see the shift in his expression. He's not scared anymore. He's focused. And then, in 3 different locations simultaneously, Will stops the Demogorgons mid-attack. They just freeze in the air, completely under his control. Then he does what Vecna does to his human victims. He snaps their limbs, crushing them with his mind, and they explode into dust. The scene cuts back to Will, and he's got blood dripping from his nose, exactly like 11 after she uses her powers. It's the same telekinetic energy, the same psychic force, but Will's accessing it in a completely different way. Because here's where it gets really interesting. Will's powers aren't the same as 11's, not exactly. 11 was experimented on in the lab, and her abilities are raw telekinetic force. She can move objects, throw people around, close gates, that sort of thing. Her power is direct and physical, but Will's power works through the hive mind itself. He can tap into the network that Vecna uses to control all the creatures from the upside down, and he can manipulate anything connected to it. The implications are absolutely wild. Will doesn't need to be in the same location as the creatures to control them. In that scene, he destroyed demogorgons that were in 3 completely different places. He wasn't even looking at them. He was just tapped into the frequency, if you like, and he could feel them through the connection. It's like he's hacking into Vecna's own control system. Matt Duffer, one of the show's creators, explained in an interview that Will can tap into the hive mind, and then he can manipulate anything within the hive, which means, theoretically, Will could control any creature that's part of Vecna's army, demogorgons, demobats, the vines, potentially even the mind flayer itself, if it's part of the network. But there's a catch, and it's an important one. Will can't open or close gates. That's still 11's domain. She's the only one with that specific ability, probably because her powers came from a different source. So whilst Will's become incredibly powerful in his own right, he's not a replacement for 11. They need each other. She handles the dimensional barriers, he handles everything on the other side of them. To be honest, this has been foreshadowed from the very beginning, and I'm kind of amazed more people didn't see it coming. Well, some did, obviously. Fans have been theorising about Will having powers for years, but the show's been dropping hints constantly. In Season 1, Will survived in the Upside Down for nearly a week without food or water, and he was able to communicate with Joyce through the lights, which is something that requires a connection to the electrical systems that no normal person should have. In Season 2, whilst the Mind Flayer was possessing him, there were moments where it seemed like the connection went both ways. Will could see what the Mind Flayer saw, but he could also influence it, even if he didn't realise that's what he was doing. And there's this really cool detail that most people probably missed. In several scenes where 11 enters the void, that black psychic space she uses to find people, Will is the only person she can actually touch and communicate with directly. Not hear his thoughts from a distance, but actually interact with him as if he's there with her in that space. That's not normal. That only happens with people who have some kind of psychic ability themselves. The Duffer brothers confirmed in that same interview that they've been planning this reveal for as long as they can remember working on the show. Ross Duffer said Will had a dark version of these powers back in Season 2 when he was possessed, but he didn't realise he could turn them around and use them against Vecna. Learning that, figuring out how to weaponize his own curse. That's his journey in Season 5. There's also this parallel to how Vecna got his powers in the first place. The prequel play, Stranger Things. The first shadow reveals that when Henry Creel was a child, he wandered into a cave in Nevada and accidentally got transported to Dimension X. The Mind Flayer possessed him there, physically changing him and giving him abilities. It's the exact same process. The Mind Flayer flays someone, alters their body with its particles, and boom, powers. Vecna did it to Will. The Mind Flayer did it to Vecna. It's all connected. So what does this mean for Volume 2? Well, Vecna made a massive miscalculation. He chose Will because he thought Will was weak, sensitive, easy to control. He saw a scared kid and assumed that's all he'd ever be. But with people around him who love him, with encouragement from Joyce and Mike, and now Robin, Will's discovering he's actually incredibly strong. He's not the victim anymore. He's the wizard, the sorcerer, exactly like his D&D character, and Vecna doesn't know this yet. In the final scene of Volume 1, after Will destroys those demogorgons, Vecna's standing there, looking confused because something in his hive mind just went wrong, and he can't figure out what. He doesn't realise Will can fight back. That's going to be his downfall. The really tragic thing, though, is that Will's powers come with a cost. Using them clearly hurts, based on the nosebleed and how exhausted he looked afterwards. And there's still the question of whether he can fully control them or if they might control him. The line between using the hive mind and being used by it is probably pretty thin. That's the risk, but it's also what makes Will the perfect weapon against Vecna, because he understands that darkness in a way no one else does. One last thing that's absolutely crucial. Will's transformation gives hope to a theory about the other kids Vecna's taken. If Will developed powers from being flayed, and Holly and the other 11 children have been flayed the exact same way, then they might all have the potential to develop abilities too. Vecna thinks he's building an army of vessels he can control. But what if Will can reach them first? What if he can teach them to fight back the same way he did? That would turn Vecna's entire plan on its head. Instead of 12 helpless victims, he'd have 12 powered kids who are proper angry and ready to destroy him. But that's speculation for later sections. Right now, the takeaway is this. Will Byers isn't just connected to the Upside Down anymore. He's learned to master that connection, and he's become one of the most powerful characters in the entire show. The question isn't whether he'll play a major role in defeating Vecna. The question is whether he'll have to sacrifice something to do it. Which brings us to an even bigger mystery. If Will has Vecna's powers, and Vecna got his powers from the Mind Flayer, then who's really in charge of the Upside Down? Because the answer to that question might change everything we think we know about this war. Now this is a theory that's been dividing fans since Season 4, and the first Shadow Broadway play just made it even more complicated. The question is simple, but the implications are massive. Who's actually in charge of the Upside Down? Is it Vecna, controlling the Mind Flayer like a puppet? Or is the Mind Flayer the true villain, with Vecna as its unwitting servant? Season 4 presented what seemed like a pretty clear answer. We watched young Henry Creel get blasted into the Upside Down by 11 back in 1979, and then we saw him reshape the Mind Flayer from shadowy particles into the spider-like form we recognise. The show framed it as Vecna creating the Mind Flayer, moulding it to serve his purposes. Case closed, right? Vecna's the big bad, the Mind Flayer is his weapon, end of story. Except the first Shadow completely flips that narrative. The prequel play reveals that when Henry was just a child in the 1950s, decades before he ever went to Hawkins' lab, he stumbled into a cave in Nevada during a family road trip. That cave transported him to Dimension X, and there he encountered the Mind Flayer in its original shadowy form, and it possessed him. It physically entered his body, changed him, gave him his powers. This happened before Brenner, before the lab, before any of the events we saw in Season 4. So if the Mind Flayer gave Henry his powers in the first place, how could Henry have created the Mind Flayer years later? It's a proper chicken or egg situation, and it's driving me mental trying to work it out. Here's one interpretation. The Mind Flayer that possessed young Henry in Dimension X is an ancient entity, possibly the source of all psychic power in that realm. When 11 blasted adult Henry into the Upside Down in 1979, he didn't create the Mind Flayer. He reshaped it, reorganized it, gave it a new form. But the consciousness, the intelligence, the power behind it, that was already there. Henry just thought he was in control because he could manipulate its physical shape. Think of it like this. You can mold clay into whatever sculpture you want, but that doesn't mean you created the clay itself. Henry shaped the Mind Flayer's body, but the Mind Flayer's essence, its actual being, predates him by possibly centuries or even millennia. This theory gets really interesting when you look at how the Mind Flayer behaves throughout the series. In Season 2, it possessed Will and used him as a spy, but it also seemed to be learning from him, adapting to the human world. In Season 3, It built that massive flesh monster and specifically targeted 11, like it wanted to consume her power. These don't feel like Henry's strategies. They feel more primal, more ancient, like something that's been hunting for power across dimensions for a very long time. There's also this detail from Volume 1 that loads of people are talking about. Max is hiding in Vecna's memories, specifically in a cave that Vecna is terrified of. Now, Vecna's not exactly the type to be scared of much. He's killed dozens of people, he's trying to destroy the world, he's got an army of monsters. What could possibly frighten him? The cave. The same cave where he was first possessed as a child. That fear suggests trauma, which makes sense, but it also suggests the Mind Flayer left a mark on Henry that he's never recovered from. If Vecna truly controlled the Mind Flayer completely, why would he fear the place where he first encountered it? Unless deep down, he knows he's not actually in charge. He's just the current host for something far older and more dangerous. Another theory circulating is that Dimension X and the Upside Down are actually two different places. Dimension X is the original realm, pure and untouched, where the Mind Flayer originated. The Upside Down is what happened when 11 accidentally opened a gate in 1983 and created a twisted mirror of Hawkins, infected with elements from Dimension X. The Mind Flayer we see in the show might be operating in this in-between space, pulling strings in both dimensions. If that's true, then defeating Vecna might not be enough to end the threat. Killing Henry just removes one corrupted host. The Mind Flayer would still exist in Dimension X, and it could find another person to possess, start the whole cycle over again. To truly win, they'd need to seal off Dimension X entirely or destroy the Mind Flayer at its source. But here's where I think the show might be heading with this. What if neither is fully in control? What if it's a symbiotic relationship that's become so intertwined that separating them is impossible? Henry's consciousness and the Mind Flayer's consciousness have been merged since he was a child. His ambitions, his hatred, his desire to remake the world, those might be genuinely his. But the power to achieve those goals, the psychic network, the hive mind, that's all the Mind Flayer's contribution. They're basically partners in evil, even if Henry doesn't fully realize it. Volume 1 shows us that anyone flayed by the Mind Flayer's particles gains abilities. Will has them, Henry has them, and now potentially 12 other kids have them. The source of all this power is the Mind Flayer. It's the battery that everything else runs on. So even if Vecna thinks he's calling the shots, he's really just the most powerful device plugged into a much larger source of energy. The Duffer Brothers have promised that Season 5 will answer questions about the Upside Down's origins, and I'm really hoping this is one of them. Because if the Mind Flayer is the true big bad, if it's been manipulating events from the shadows this entire time, then the final battle is going to be so much more complex than just kill Vecna and everything's fixed. There's also the disturbing possibility that even if they defeat both Vecna and the Mind Flayer, the door to Dimension X might remain. And if that realm is full of entities like the Mind Flayer, entities that seek out vulnerable people to possess and grant powers to, then the threat never truly ends. Hawkins might just be the first of many locations that fall victim to this. I'm not entirely convinced Vecna is the top of the food chain here. He's powerful, he's terrifying, he's orchestrating this apocalypse, but I think he's doing it whilst something even worse whispers in his ear, using him just as much as he thinks he's using it. And that's a far more frightening thought than any monster we've seen so far. Speaking of frightening, let's talk about someone who's been trapped in a nightmare since the Season 4 finale. Max Mayfield's fate has been one of the show's biggest cliffhangers, and Volume 1 finally gave us some answers, whilst somehow creating even more questions. At the end of Season 4, Vecna broke Max's bones, blinded her, and basically killed her. 11 managed to restart her heart using her powers, but Max didn't wake up. Her body's alive, breathing, hooked up to machines in Hawkins Hospital. But her mind, her consciousness, that's somewhere else entirely. Volume 1 confirms what loads of fans suspected. Max is trapped inside Vecna's mind, specifically inside his memories. She's conscious, she's aware, but she's stuck in this psychological prison with no clear way out. It's absolutely horrific when you think about it. She's been there for over a year, hiding from Vecna in his own headspace, trying not to be discovered. But here's where it gets interesting, and this is tied directly to what we just discussed about the mind flayer. Max isn't wandering randomly through Vecna's memories. She's found a specific place to hide, a place where Vecna won't follow her, a cave in the middle of a desert. Now, if you've seen the first shadow or you've been following the lore closely, you'll know exactly why this matters. That cave is where young Henry Creel was transported to Dimension X and possessed by the Mind Flayer. It's the origin point of his powers, the moment his life changed forever, and apparently it's a memory that still terrifies him decades later. Max figured this out somehow. She's hiding in the one memory that Vecna is too scared to revisit. It's brilliant, really. She's using his own trauma against him. This opens up loads of possibilities for Volume 2. Max isn't just surviving, she's actively navigating Vecna's psychology, finding his weaknesses, learning things about him that no one else knows. And if she can get that information to 11 or the others, it could be the key to defeating him. Which brings us to the Oracle theory. Some fans are speculating that Max's time in Vecna's mind has given her a unique ability, similar to what Will experienced in Season 2 when the Mind Flayer possessed him. When you're that deeply connected to a powerful psychic entity, the connection goes both ways. You might be trapped, but you can also sense things. You can feel movements, intentions, plans. Max could have become an oracle of sorts, someone who can predict Vecna's next moves, because she's literally inside his head. She'd know where he's going, what he's planning, who he's targeting next. She'd be able to warn the others before Vecna even acts. The parallel to Will is pretty obvious. In Season 2, Will could sense the Mind Flayer's presence, could see through the eyes of the creatures in the tunnels, could feel when the soldiers were burning the vines. He was being used as a spy, but that connection also gave the group crucial intel about the enemy's weaknesses. Max could be in a similar position now, except she's inside Vecna himself, which is an even more valuable vantage point. There's also the question of whether Max can wake up at all. Her body's fine physically, the injury's healed, but her mind isn't reconnecting to her body because it's still trapped somewhere else. Eleven's tried to reach her in the void multiple times, but Max is too far away, buried too deep in Vecna's mindscape. One theory is that when Vecna is finally defeated, when his consciousness is destroyed or severed from the hive mind, Max will be released. She'll snap back to her body like a rubber band, and she'll wake up. That would be the happy ending everyone's hoping for. But there's a darker possibility. What if Max is already too far gone? What if being trapped in Vecna's mind for this long has fundamentally changed her, the same way Will was changed by his time in the Upside Down? She could wake up with powers of her own, abilities she doesn't understand or can't control. She could wake up with pieces of Vecna's consciousness still attached to her, influencing her thoughts. Or she might not wake up at all. If Vecna dies whilst Max is still inside his mind, her consciousness could die with him. It's the risk of any deep psychic connection. You tie yourself too closely to someone else, and your fates become intertwined. There's this really tragic element to Max's storyline that I think gets overlooked sometimes. She wanted to die. Back in Season 4, she was suicidal, consumed by grief and guilt over Billy's death. She wrote those letters to her friends. She went to Billy's grave. She was ready to let Vecna take her. And even though 11 saved her body, Max's mind is still in that dark place, still trapped in a nightmare of guilt and pain. Waking up from that, coming back to the real world after everything she's been through, that's going to be incredibly difficult, even if they manage to free her. The psychological damage alone could take years to process, and that's assuming she comes back the same person she was, which seems increasingly unlikely. Some fans think Max won't survive the series, that her story is ultimately a tragedy, that she'll sacrifice herself in some final heroic moment to help defeat Vecna from the inside. I really hope that's not the case. Max deserves a happy ending after everything she's suffered. But this is Stranger Things, and the Duffer Brothers have never been afraid to break our hearts. What I'm personally hoping for is something in between. Max wakes up, but she's changed. She has abilities now, a connection to the Upside Down that she'll carry for the rest of her life, just like Will. She becomes part of this weird little group of people who've been touched by that realm and survived. And maybe that connection, as painful as it is, ends up being what saves everyone. Because if Max can predict Vecna's moves, if she can guide Eleven to his exact location, or reveal the specific memory that will destroy him, then her suffering won't have been for nothing. She'll have become the weapon none of them saw coming. But first she has to wake up. And with only 3 episodes left, time's running out. Let's address the Demogorgon in The Room. Someone major is probably dying in Volume 2, and the internet has been placing bets on who's going to bite it. Morbid, I know, but it's Stranger Things. The show's never shied away from killing characters we love. And this is the finale. Stakes have never been higher. Surprisingly, no one died in Volume 1. Not a single main character. There were loads of close calls, don't get me wrong. The Wheeler family nearly got slaughtered when the Demogorgon broke into their house to kidnap Holly. Karen got properly mauled, slashed across the torso by those claws, and Ted got thrown through a wall when he tried to fight the thing off with a golf club. Brave, stupid, very Ted Wheeler. But they survived. The military got absolutely decimated at Max there, that's true. Hundreds of soldiers dead. But soldiers don't count the same way in terms of emotional impact, you know. We're talking about the core group here, the people we followed for 5 seasons. So if Volume 1 spared everyone, Volume 2 probably won't be so kind. The character with the highest odds of dying, according to both fan theories and actual betting websites, is 11. And honestly, it makes a devastating amount of sense. Her death has been foreshadowed from the very beginning of the show. Back in Season 1, the original ending was supposed to be 11 sacrificing herself to destroy the Demogorgon, and that was meant to be permanent. The Duffer Brothers have said they always intended for the story to come full circle, and 11 dying to save everyone would absolutely do that. There's also Brenner's warning in Season 2. He told 11 that using her powers the way she does, pushing them to their absolute limits, would eventually kill her. We've seen her powers hurt her repeatedly. The nosebleeds, the exhaustion, the times she's passed out from overexertion. It's been building to something, and that something could very well be her death. One Reddit theory I read put it really well. The user pointed out that every time 11 goes all out against a major threat, she loses a bit more of herself. Season 1, she disappeared into the void. Season 3, she lost her powers entirely. Season 4, she had to relive her trauma at Hawkins' lab to get them back. There's this pattern of sacrifice, of her giving pieces of herself to protect the people she loves. The final sacrifice would be her life itself. And narratively, it would hurt in the exact right way. 11's the heart of the show. She's the character whose journey we've followed most closely. Her learning to be human, to have friends, to have a family, to fall in love, all whilst carrying the weight of being the most powerful person in the room. If she dies saving everyone, it would be tragic and heroic and absolutely gutting, but I'm not entirely convinced it'll happen. The Duffer Brothers know how much we love 11. Killing her feels almost too obvious, too expected. They might fake us out, make us think she's going to die, build to that, sacrifice, and then find another way. The other major death theory centres on Will, and this one's got some proper dark Harry Potter vibes to it. The theory goes like this. Will and Vecna are too deeply connected now. Will's powers come from Vecna's flaying. His consciousness has been intertwined with the hive mind since 1983. To truly destroy Vecna and the Mind Flayer, to sever that connection permanently, Will might have to die as well. It's the Horcrux problem, basically. Harry Potter had a piece of Voldemort's soul inside him, and the only way to destroy it was for Harry to die. Will has particles from the Upside Down inside him, woven into his very being. Killing Vecna might not be enough if Will's still carrying that corruption. He'd become the last link to the Upside Down, and that link would need to be severed. God, I hope that's not where they're going with this. Will's suffered enough. He's been the victim since episode 1, letting him finally have powers, finally be the hero, and then immediately killing him. That would be cruel even by Stranger Things standards. But Noah Schnapp, who plays Will, has given some interviews that make me worried. He's talked about how Will's arc is about finding strength through suffering, about becoming someone who can protect others instead of always needing protection. That sounds like setup for a heroic sacrifice to me. There are other characters in the danger zone, of course. Jonathan's got odds of 13-2 for dying, and there's a theory that he'll sacrifice himself to save Will, the older brother protecting the younger one, completing his arc of always putting his family first. Lucas has odds of 81, though those seem pretty safe. Same with Hopper at 11-2. If they were going to kill Hopper, they would have done it in Russia. Bringing him back just to kill him again would feel redundant. Steve's another one people are worried about. He's had so many close calls over the seasons, and there's this running joke in the fandom that he's basically the mum of the group, always protecting the kids. The hero mum, sacrificing himself to save his children, is a very Stranger Things type of ending. But I don't think they'll do it. Steve's too beloved, and his death wouldn't serve the story the way Eleven's or Will's might. Then there's Vecna himself, obviously. He's got the best odds to die at 7-4, which makes sense because he's the villain, and this is the finale. But even that's not guaranteed. Some theories suggest they won't be able to kill him, only imprison him or seal him away. That would leave the door open for the Upside Down to return someday, which feels wrong for a series finale, but could work if they wanted to keep the universe alive for potential spin-offs. What strikes me about all these theories is how much they focus on the main characters, but Stranger Things has always been willing to kill side characters too. Bob, Barb, Alexei, Eddie. People we loved, but who weren't part of the core group. Volume 2 could easily kill someone like Murray, or one of the Hellfire Club kids, or even someone like Nancy's mum Karen, who nearly died already in Volume 1. The truth is, we won't know until we watch it. The Duffer Brothers have been incredibly secretive about the ending, and the cast has been trained not to spoil anything. But based on the foreshadowing, the narrative arcs, and the fact that this is a finale where everything's on the line, I'd say at least 2 major characters are dying. 1 hero, 1 villain, possibly more if they're feeling particularly brutal. My gut says 11 and Vecna both die, possibly taking each other out in some final confrontation. Will survives but carries the trauma forever. And 1 unexpected character, someone we think is safe, doesn't make it. That would balance the tragedy with the hope, give us the bittersweet ending that feels earned. But honestly, I'm prepared to be completely wrong. This show surprised me before, and I'm sure it'll surprise me again. What I'm not prepared for is how much it's going to hurt, regardless of who goes. Eddie Munson's death wrecked us all. Properly, genuinely devastating. And fans have been desperately hoping for his return ever since the Season 4 finale aired. The theory that's gained the most traction, the one that refuses to die, no matter how many times it gets debunked, is that Eddie will come back as Kaz the Bloody-Handed. For those not deep into Dungeons & Dragons lore, Kaz is a legendary figure from the game's mythology. He was Vecna's most trusted lieutenant, a powerful warrior who served the Lich Lord faithfully for years. Vecna rewarded this loyalty by transforming Kaz into a vampire, granting him immortality and even greater power. But Kaz eventually betrayed his master, attacking Vecna with a legendary sword and managing to slice off Vecna's left hand and left eye before both of them were supposedly destroyed in the battle. The parallels to Eddie seem almost too perfect to be coincidental. Eddie died in the Upside Down, after being swarmed by demobats, creatures that are basically vampire bats from hell. He died wielding a shield and a makeshift spear, defending Dustin and buying time for the others. In D&D lore, Cass is known for favouring a one-handed weapon and shield. Eddie even name-drops Cass during the Hellfire Club campaign in Episode 1, saying Vecna was killed by Cass before revealing the villain was actually still alive. It's foreshadowing. It has to be, right? That's what fans have been arguing for 2.5 years now. The theory goes that Eddie didn't actually die, or if he did, the Upside Down won't let him stay dead. Those demobat bites could have turned him into something else, something undead. Vecna could resurrect him, twist him into a dark version of himself, use him as a lieutenant, just like the D&D lore suggests. And then, at the crucial moment, Eddie would betray Vecna, remembering who he really was, and turning against his master to save his friends. It's brilliant. It's emotional. It would give Eddie the hero's ending he deserved but didn't quite get, and it would tie the D&D mythology into the show in the most literal way possible. There's just one massive problem with this theory. It's been definitively, absolutely, completely debunked by the people who would actually know. Matt Duffer gave an interview back in October 2025 where he was asked directly about Eddie's potential return. His response was pretty blunt. He said Eddie is dead, Joseph Quinn is too busy filming movies to come back anyway, and fans should stop holding out hope. It wasn't vague, it wasn't coy, it was a clear no. Joseph Quinn himself has been playing with fans a bit, giving cheeky non-answers at red carpet events, but he hasn't filmed anything for Season 5. There's been no secret shooting, no surprise cameo, nothing. And the Volume 1 trailer showed Dustin visiting Eddie's grave, which has been vandalised with the words "Burn in Hell" spray-painted across the headstone. The town still sees him as a satanic murderer. His death is very much permanent. So why does the Cars theory persist? Because whilst Eddie won't return, the Cars mythology absolutely will. Just not in the way fans expected. Will Byers is Cass. Think about it. Will was Vecna's first victim, taken in 1983 and flayed, connected to the hive mind. He's been under Vecna's influence for years, serving as an unwitting spy in Season 2, carrying that connection even when he tried to move on. Vecna thought Will was weak, easy to control, the perfect vessel for his plans. But in Volume 1, Will betrayed him. Will turned Vecna's own power against him, taking control of the hive mind and destroying the Demogorgons. That's the Cars betrayal right there. The loyal servant who rises up and strikes at his master using the very gifts he was given. Will even has psychic abilities now. Just like Cass had supernatural powers, he can manipulate the creatures of the Upside Down, potentially even sever Vecna's connection to them entirely. And he's got motivation that goes way beyond anything Cass had in the game. This isn't about power or ambition. This is personal. Vecna stole Will's childhood, his sense of safety, his ability to just be a normal kid. Will's got every reason to want Vecna destroyed. The sword in D&D lore, the Sword of Kaz, is what ultimately wounded Vecna. In the show, Will's weapon isn't a literal sword. It's his connection to the hive mind, his ability to hack into the network and turn it against its creator. That's even more poetic, honestly. Vecna created his own downfall the moment he chose Will as his first victim. Eddie's role in this isn't as the resurrected warrior, it's as the prophet, the dungeon master, who laid out the story before it happened. When Eddie ran that campaign about Vecna and Cass, he was unknowingly narrating Will's destiny. The metalhead who loved telling stories became part of the greatest story of all, even if he didn't live to see how it ended. It's bittersweet, and I know fans wanted more. We all wanted Eddie back, wanted him to have another chance to be the hero he proved himself to be in those final moments. But his story is complete. He redeemed himself. He stopped running. He became the person he always wanted to be, even if it cost him everything. The Cars theory isn't dead. It just belongs to someone else now. And honestly, giving it to Will makes infinitely more sense than bringing Eddie back as a vampire or whatever. Will's been connected to this story from the very first scene of the very first episode. If anyone's going to be the one to betray Vecna and strike the killing blow, it should be him. Eddie would approve. He'd probably run a whole campaign about it. Way back in Season 1's finale, when Will finally returns from the Upside Down and rejoins his friends, the boys sit down for another game of Dungeons and Dragons. It's this beautiful, quiet moment after all the chaos. Will rolls the dice, casts a fireball spell, and defeats the monster they're facing. Mike announces that Will the Wise has slain the Thessal Hydra, and everyone cheers. At the time, it felt like a nice bookend to the season. The campaign that got interrupted in Episode 1 finally gets completed. Will's home, he's safe, everything's back to normal. Except it wasn't foreshadowing that Will would be fine. It was foreshadowing what monster would appear at the very end of the series. Because Stranger Things has been using Dungeons and Dragons creatures as a roadmap since the beginning, and we're only just now realising how literal that roadmap actually is. In Season 1, the kids play a campaign against a Demogorgon. Then a real Demogorgon appears and terrorises Hawkins, eventually kidnapping Will. In Season 2, Dustin uses a D&D manual to identify the Mind Flayer, the shadow monster possessing Will and controlling the Demodogs. Season 4 brings Vecna, named after the Lich Lord from Eddie's campaign. The pattern is consistent. The monsters in the game become the monsters in real life. So what's left? The Thessal Hydra, the only major creature from those early campaigns that hasn't appeared yet, and Volume 1 might have just confirmed it's coming. In the Season 5 release date teaser from last year, there's a shot of Will looking up at something off screen, absolutely terrified, screaming, "Run!" to whoever's nearby. His voice is so loud and desperate that it's easy to miss the sound in the background. But if you listen closely, there's a roar, a massive, earth-shaking, distinctly reptilian roar that sounds nothing like the Demogorgons or the Mind Flayer we've heard before. It sounds like a dragon. Now, in traditional Dungeons and Dragons lore, the Thessal Hydra isn't a dragon. It's a Hydra variant, a massive reptilian creature with 8 heads arranged in a circle around a central mouth. Think of a ring of serpent heads, all connected to one enormous torso, with this gaping maw in the middle, filled with rows of jagged teeth. It's 40 feet long, 9 feet tall at the shoulder, and absolutely horrifying to look at. But the Duffer Brothers don't copy D&D designs exactly. They adapt them, twist them, make them fit the Stranger Things aesthetic. The Mind Flayer in D&D is a tentacled squid creature, but in the show it's a massive shadow spider. So the Thessal Hydra could easily be redesigned as something more dragon-like, especially if they want it to fly. And that shot of Will looking up suggests whatever he's seeing is airborne. There's been loads of hints building toward this across multiple seasons. Nancy's vision in Season 4 showed her, a giant creature with a gaping mouth looming over Hawkins as the town tears itself apart. That description matches the Thessal Hydra's central mouth perfectly. Will painted a picture in Season 4 showing the party fighting a 3-headed red dragon, which he gave to Mike as a gift. 3 heads, not 8, but close enough to be symbolic. Even the subtitles have been dropping clues. When Nancy, Steve and Robin were exploring the Upside Down in Season 4, they heard a distant roar that the subtitles just labelled as an unidentified creature. They never investigated. They assumed it was just ambient noise from that realm. But what if it was the Thessal Hydra, lurking somewhere in the depths, waiting for its moment? The big question is how this creature fits into the larger story. Is it just another monster under Vecna's control, part of his army, or is it something more significant? Some fans theorize the Thessal Hydra is the Mind Flayer's true form, that the spider shape we've seen is just one manifestation, one body it can inhabit, but the actual creature is this multi-headed dragon thing that's been hiding in Dimension X this whole time. When Vecna breaks through that mysterious wall discovered in Volume 1, when he tears down the final barrier between dimensions, the Thessal Hydra emerges as the ultimate threat. That would make it the perfect final boss. Not just a minion of Vecna's, but the physical, embodiment of the Mind Flayer itself, the source of all the corruption and evil that's been plaguing Hawkins since 1983. It would also explain why the show's been holding it back for so long. You don't introduce your biggest, scariest monster until the finale. You build to it. And if the Duffer Brothers have been planning this since they had Will cast that fireball in season 1, then they've been building to it for 9 years. There's also symbolic weight to Will being the one to defeat it. In that season 1 D&D game, Will's fireball worked. He rolled a 14, which Mike said was enough to kill the Thessal Hydra. If the show's coming full circle, if everything's meant to echo back to the beginning, then Will defeating the Thessal Hydra in real life would be poetry. The scared little kid who spent season 1 hiding and running would destroy the final monster using the powers that came from his trauma. Will the Wise lives up to his name. Of course, there's a chance I'm completely wrong about all this. Maybe the roar in the teaser is something else entirely. Maybe the Thessal Hydra is a red herring, a fan theory the Duffer Brothers are aware of and deliberately subverting. They've said most fan theories are incorrect after all, but the evidence is pretty compelling. The pattern's been consistent for 4 seasons. The D&D monsters always show up eventually, and the Thessal Hydra is the only major one left unaccounted for. Nancy saw a creature with a gaping mouth in her vision. Will painted a multi-headed dragon. The release teaser featured a roar that sounded distinctly dragon-like. Characters keep referencing it in interviews and behind-the-scenes content. There's even been merch showing a creature that looks suspiciously Hydra-esque. If it doesn't appear, it'll be the single biggest piece of abandoned foreshadowing in the entire series. My money's on it showing up in episode 7 or 8, emerging from the depths of the Upside Down as Vecna's final weapon or the Mind Flayer's true body. And when it does, it's going to make every other monster we've seen look small by comparison. The Demogorgon was terrifying. The Mind Flayer was massive. Vecna's cunning and cruel. But the Thessal Hydra? That's going to be the nightmare that makes all the others seem quaint. I really hope I'm right about this, because defeating a multi-headed dragon to save the world would be the most epic ending Stranger Things could possibly have. Vecna didn't just randomly snatch kids from Hawkins. There's a very specific reason he took exactly 12 children. And when you dig into the theories about why, it gets proper dark. Volume 1 shows us that Vecna's been methodically kidnapping children and bringing them to the Upside Down, where he connects them to this flesh wall covered in vines. The vines go into their mouths, down their throats, the same way he did to Will back in 1983. He's flaying them, connecting them to the hive mind, physically altering their bodies with particles from the Upside Down. Holly Wheeler is one of them. So is a kid named Derek Turnbow. The others we don't know much about yet, but we know there are 12 in total. Vecna even calls them his potential vessels when he's talking to Will, which is an absolutely chilling choice of words. Vessels for what exactly? The most popular theory is that Vecna's building an army of powered individuals. We've established that anyone who gets flayed by the Mind Flayer's particles can develop psychic abilities. It happened to Henry Creel as a child. It happened to Will. And now it's happening to these 12 kids. Vecna's essentially mass-producing telekinetic soldiers who'll be loyal to him because they're part of his hive mind. But there's more to it than just creating servants. The number 12 is significant, and it's not random. Remember the very first episode of Season 4? Eddie's Dungeons & Dragons campaign is called The Cult of Vecna, not the Army of Vecna, or The Monsters of Vecna. The cult. That word choice matters. Cults need followers, believers, people who've been indoctrinated into serving a cause. 12 followers is a very specific number with loads of religious and mystical connotations. 12 apostles, 12 signs of the zodiac, 12 members of a coven in some traditions. Vecna's not just building an army, he's building a cult of powered children who'll help him tear down the barriers between dimensions and reshape reality itself. There's also a theory that ties into X-Men comics, specifically an event called Inferno from 1989. In that storyline, 12 children were kidnapped and used to open portals between Earth and a hell dimension called Limbo. The number of children, the portal opening purpose, the demonic realm on the other side, the parallels are a bit too close to be coincidental. The Duffer Brothers loved their 80s references, and X-Men was massive during the period when Stranger Things is set. If that's what Vecna's planning, then these 12 children aren't just vessels for power. They're anchors, magical batteries that he can use to keep the gates open permanently. Even if 11 closes the main rifts, even if the party destroys Vecna himself, as long as those 12 kids are still connected to the Upside Down, the portals could remain active. That would make them the ultimate fail-safe. Kill Vecna, but the gates stay open because 12 living anchors are holding them there. Now here's where Will's new powers become absolutely crucial. If those 12 kids can develop abilities from being flayed, and Will's figured out how to access and control his own connection to the hive mind, then he might be able to reach them. He might be able to communicate with them whilst they're trapped, teach them the same trick he learned, show them how to resist Vecna's control. Imagine it. Vecna thinks he's got 12 obedient vessels ready to do his bidding. Then at the critical moment, all 12 of them turn on him simultaneously because Will's been working behind the scenes, building his own counter-cult inside Vecna's mind. It would be poetic justice. Vecna's greatest weapon becomes his greatest weakness. Holly being one of the 12 adds emotional weight that's really important. She's not just a random kid, she's Mike's little sister. The Wheelers have been central to this story from the beginning, and Nancy and Mike have both played massive roles in fighting the Upside Down. Having their youngest family member be part of Vecna's plan raises the stakes in a deeply personal way. There's also something interesting about how Vecna chose these specific kids. They're not just convenient victims. In Volume 1, there's this theory floating around that Vecna can sense latent psychic potential in people, especially children who've been exposed to particles from the Upside Down over the years. Hawkins has had gates opening and closing since 1983. The entire town's been breathing in trace amounts of that corruption for years. Some kids might be more susceptible than others, might have dormant abilities just waiting to be activated. Vecna's not randomly kidnapping children. He's selecting the ones who already have the potential to become powerful. He's cherry-picking future psychics and accelerating their development by flaying them. If that's true, then Hawkins has been a breeding ground for powered individuals this whole time, and no one realised it. The town's not just cursed, it's been fundamentally changed on a biological level by proximity to the Upside Down, which raises a horrifying question. If 12 kids in Hawkins have this potential, how many others are out there who just haven't been activated yet? How many people in that town are walking around with dormant psychic abilities that could manifest at any moment? And what happens to them if Vecna wins? Do they all become part of his cult, whether they want to or not? The 12 children aren't just hostages or victims. They're the key to everything. Save them, and you prevent Vecna's endgame. Lose them, and the Upside Down consumes Hawkins permanently, spreading outward until the entire world becomes part of the hive mind. No pressure on Will, then. One of Volume 1's biggest surprises was the return of Kali Prasad, also known as 8, 11's long-lost sister, from that divisive Season 2 episode. And I mean divisive in the sense that half the fandom loved it and half absolutely hated it. But whether you enjoyed The Lost Sister or not, Kali's back, and her return actually matters way more than most people probably expected. For anyone who needs a refresher, Kali was introduced in Season 2, Episode 7, when 11 went on her solo adventure to Chicago. She's another child who was experimented on at Hawkins' lab, given the number 8, and she escaped years before 11 did. Her power is creating illusions. She can make people see things that aren't there, hallucinate entire scenarios, believe in false realities. It's basically weaponized perception manipulation. At the time, the episode felt like a detour, Eleven needed to learn about her past and decide who she wanted to be, and Coley represented the darker path, the revenge-driven vigilante who uses her powers to punish those who wronged her. 11 ultimately rejected that path and returned to Hawkins, and we never saw Carly again. Until now. Volume 1 reveals that Carly's been held captive, and not just anywhere. She's being used to power the satellite technology that's been blocking Eleven's abilities. Hopper calls it kryptonite. And he's not wrong. This tech is the only thing that's managed to consistently neutralize Eleven's powers. And it turns out it's fueled by another psychic's abilities. The way it works isn't fully explained yet, but the implication is that Carly's illusion powers are somehow being harnessed or weaponized to create a field that disrupts other psychic abilities. It's a really clever use of her specific gift. If she can make people see things that aren't real, maybe she can make reality itself seem fake to other psychics, scrambling their connection to their powers. She's clearly not doing this willingly. The scenes in Volume 1 show her looking exhausted, trapped, being used as a battery against her will. It's tragic, really. She spent years fighting for freedom, building a life outside the lab, and now she's imprisoned again, forced to serve the very system she was trying to escape. But 11, finding her changes everything. They're reunited, and the Duffer Brothers have called this a big swing for the series, which suggests Carly's going to play a major role in the final episodes. There's this theory I absolutely love that involves D&D math. In Dungeons & Dragons, rolling a 20 on a 20-sided die is called a critical hit. It's the best possible roll, an automatic success that often turns a tide of battle. To defeat Vecna in the game, you'd need that critical hit. Right now, we've got 11, who's basically an 11 on the psychic power scale. We've got 8, Carly, who's obviously an 8. And we've got Will, who's now displaying powers similar to Vecna's, making him a 1, since Vecna was originally number 1 at the lab. 8 plus 11 plus 1 equals 20. A critical hit. It's almost too perfect to be coincidence. The three of them working together, combining their different abilities, could be exactly what's needed to take down Vecna permanently. 11's raw telekinetic power, Carly's illusions, and Will's control over the hive mind. Each one covers a weakness the others have. Carly's illusions are particularly interesting when you think about fighting Vecna. He's a psychic villain who operates by trapping people in mental prisons, forcing them to experience their worst memories and traumas. But what if someone could create false realities that even he can't distinguish from real ones? What if Carly could trap Vecna in an illusion, whilst 11 and Will attack his actual body? It's basically fighting fire with fire. Vecna uses psychological warfare, so hit him with psychological warfare right back. There's also a darker theory floating around that Vecna might have already absorbed some of Carly's powers. She disappeared for years before being captured. What if Vecna found her first, killed her, and took her abilities the same way he's taken powers from other victims? That would explain why he's so good at creating those hyper-realistic mental landscapes. It's not just his natural talent, it's an augmented ability stolen from someone whose entire gift revolved around crafting illusions. I'm really hoping that's not the case. Carly deserves better than being an off-screen casualty, and her dynamic with 11 is too interesting to waste. They're sisters, not by blood but by shared trauma, and seeing them work together to destroy the system that created them would be incredibly satisfying. Plus, Linnea Berthelsen, the actress, who plays Carly, wouldn't have come back just for a cameo. She's in this for a reason, and that reason is probably the final battle. Whether the critical hit theory is literally what happens, or just a fun bit of fandom math, Carly's return signals something important. 11's not alone anymore. She's got family, both blood and chosen, and they're all bringing their own strengths to this fight. Vecna better watch out. Back in Season 4, Vecna gave Nancy a vision of his endgame, and honestly, it was one of the most disturbing moments in the entire series. She saw Hawkins torn apart by 4 massive gates converging on the town, ripping it to pieces. She saw fire, destruction, people screaming, and looming over all of it was this giant creature with a gaping mouth, watching as the world ended. At the time, it felt like a nightmare scenario, something the party would prevent if they could just defeat Vecna quickly enough. They didn't defeat him quickly enough. And now, in Volume 1, we're seeing Nancy's vision become reality. The gates are open, all 4 of them. Hawkins is actively bleeding into the Upside Down, and the Upside Down is bleeding back into Hawkins. The barrier between dimensions has become so thin in some places that it's basically non-existent. You can see the corruption spreading through the town, the vines growing up through the streets, the sky turning red and stormy. It's apocalyptic. But Volume 1 introduces something new that wasn't in Nancy's vision, something that might actually be more important than the gates themselves. The mysterious wall. When Hopper and Eleven are exploring the Upside Down, trying to locate where Vecna's keeping the kidnapped children, they discover this massive structure. It's not a building. It's a wall, organic and pulsing, covered in the same fleshy material as the rest of the Upside Down, but somehow more solid, more permanent, and it's centered directly on Hawkins' lab, the place where the original gate was opened back in 1983. The characters don't fully understand what it is yet, but the theories are already flying. Some fans think the wall marks the boundary of the Upside Down itself, the edge of the corrupted mirror dimension that Eleven accidentally created when she made contact with the Demogorgon. Beyond that wall could be Dimension X, the pure original realm where the Mind Flayer came from, untouched by human influence. If that's true, then everything we've seen so far, all the horrors of the Upside Down, are just the infected outer layer. The real nightmare is on the other side of that wall, and Vecna's goal isn't just to merge Hawkins with the Upside Down. It's to break through that wall and unleash Dimension X itself on the human world. Think about what that would mean. The Upside Down is Hawkins twisted and corrupted, but it's still recognizable. The buildings are there, the streets exist, it's just dark and rotting and filled with monsters. But Dimension X? That's not a mirror of anything. It's pure chaos, pure alien wrongness, a realm that was never meant to intersect with our reality at all. The Mind Flayer originated there. The Demogorgons probably came from there. And if there are creatures like the Thessal Hydra lurking in the depths, they're not Upside Down creations. They're Dimension X natives, things that predate Vecna by possibly thousands of years. Breaking that wall would be like opening Pandora's box, except instead of releasing metaphorical evils, you're releasing actual literal monsters that make everything we've seen look tame. There's also the question of why the wall exists in the first place. Did someone build it? Is it a natural barrier between dimensions that's been there forever? Or did it form when Eleven opened the first gate, a kind of cosmic scar tissue that developed to contain the damage she caused? Some theories suggest the wall is the only thing keeping the Mind Flayer trapped in its current form, that if Vecna destroys it, the Mind Flayer would be free to manifest fully, to take its true shape, which might be the Thessal Hydra or something even worse. Nancy's vision showed 4 gates converging, but what if those gates aren't the endgame? What if they're just the setup, the weakening of reality needed to bring down the wall? Once the barrier between Hawkins and the Upside Down is gone, once those 2 realms are fully merged, then Vecna can focus all his power on that wall, punch through it, and let Dimension X come flooding in. It would explain why he's taking his time, why he's not just immediately destroying everything. He needs the gates to stabilize first. He needs Hawkins and the Upside Down to become one unified space before he can move on to Phase 2. And if the heroes are focused on closing gates, on reversing the damage, they might not realize the real threat until it's too late. Dr. K, the government scientist hunting Eleven, has been studying samples from that wall. In one scene, you can see her dissecting one of those bulging sacs that line its surface, and some kind of fluid leaks out. She's fascinated by it, treating it like a scientific discovery rather than the cosmic horror it actually is. The government thinks they can weaponize this stuff, study it, control it. They're idiots. You don't study Dimension X. You seal it off and pray it never finds a way through. And now, thanks to Vecna's manipulation and humanity's own arrogance, we're on the verge of tearing down the one barrier keeping it contained. If Volume 2 ends with that wall coming down, with Dimension X pouring into Hawkins, then Volume 3 isn't going to be about saving the town anymore. It's going to be about saving the entire world from an invasion of primordial chaos. No pressure, though. This theory sounds absolutely mental, but there's actually some compelling evidence behind it. What if Vecna has been fixated on Joyce Byers this entire time? What if Will's kidnapping in 1983 wasn't random at all, but deeply, disturbingly personal? Here's where it starts. In Volume 1, Max is hiding inside Vecna's memories, specifically in that cave that terrifies him. But before she finds the cave, she briefly ends up in a different memory, one that seems random at first. It's a hallway in Hawkins High School, completely mundane, nothing particularly special about it. Just lockers, fluorescent lights, the typical American high school aesthetic from decades ago. The weird thing is why Vecna would remember this hallway at all. Why would a random school corridor be important enough to stick in his mind for over 60 years? There's got to be a reason, and fans have been digging through every detail, trying to figure it out. The memory's dated. It's from November 6th, 1959. That date should immediately make your ears perk up, because November 6th is when Will Byers was kidnapped in 1983. That's exactly 24 years later, to the day. In the Stranger Things universe, that's not coincidence, that's intentional. On November 6, 1959, there was a school play happening at Hawkins High. The memory Max stumbles into is connected to that event. And Joyce Byers, who would have been Joyce Horowitz back then, using her maiden name, was a student at Hawkins High during that exact time period. The theory goes like this. Young Henry Creel was obsessed with Joyce when they were teenagers. Maybe he had a crush on her. Maybe it was something darker. But whatever it was, it left an impression strong enough that he remembered that specific day, that specific hallway, for the rest of his life. When Henry became Vecna, when he started planning his revenge against humanity, Joyce was still somewhere in his mind. And when he needed a first victim, when he needed someone to flay and connect to the hive mind, he chose her son. Not random, not convenient, deliberate. It would explain so much. Why Will specifically? Why not any other kid in Hawkins? There were loads of children who would have been easier targets, kids who lived closer to the lab, kids who were out later at night. But Vecna went out of his way to chase Will down that road, to hunt him specifically, because hurting Will was a way to hurt Joyce. There's also that moment at the end of Volume 1's episode 4, where Joyce and Vecna lock eyes for just a second. It's brief, barely noticeable in all the chaos, but the camera lingers on it just long enough to feel significant. Vecna looks at her, and there's this flicker of recognition, of something personal. He knows her, and she doesn't even realize it. The really tragic element of this theory is that Joyce has blamed herself for Will's kidnapping since the very beginning. She's carried guilt for years, wondering if she could have prevented it, if she'd been a better mother, if she'd picked him up that night instead of letting him ride his bike home. And if this theory is true, then it actually was her fault, but not in any way she could have anticipated or prevented. Will was targeted because of who his mother was, because decades earlier, a disturbed teenage boy became fixated on a girl who probably never even noticed him. It's horrifying, and it makes Vecna's villainy feel even more petty and vindictive. He's not just trying to destroy the world out of some grand philosophical conviction. Part of it is personal grudges, childhood obsessions that festered for 60 years until they became apocalyptic. Whether Joyce figures this out in Volume 2 remains to be seen. But if she does, if she realizes that everything her family suffered traces back to some creep who couldn't let go of a high school memory, The confrontation between her and Vecna is going to be emotionally devastating. Winona Ryder would absolutely nail that scene. Joyce has been through hell protecting her kids, and learning that it was all because of her, that would break her. Or it would make her furious enough to tear Vecna apart herself. Honestly, I'm hoping for the latter. November 6th, 1983 is Stranger Things Day for a very specific reason. It's the day everything started, the day Will Byers vanished, the day a small town in Indiana accidentally opened a door to hell. And as the series has progressed, this date keeps coming up in ways that feel increasingly intentional. Season 4 dropped a massive revelation about this date that completely recontextualizes everything we thought we knew. When Nancy, Steve, and Robin explore the Upside Down, Nancy notices something bizarre. Her diary is sitting on her desk, exactly where she left it in the real world. But when she opens it, the most recent entry is from November 6th, 1983. The Upside Down is frozen in time, not constantly changing, not reflecting the current state of Hawkins, but locked on that specific day. The question that immediately follows is why? What happened on November 6th, 1983, that was so significant it crystallized an entire dimension? The prevailing theory is that this was the moment Eleven made contact with the Demogorgon in the sensory deprivation tank. Brenner forced her into the void, told her to reach out to this creature she didn't understand, and when she touched it psychically, she accidentally tore a hole between dimensions. The Mother Gate opened. The Upside Down, or at least the version of it we see in the show, was created in that instant as a snapshot of Hawkins at that exact moment. It's basically a photograph of the town, but corrupted and infected with elements from Dimension X. The buildings, the streets, the cars, they're all copied from November 6th, 1983. Nothing that happened after that date exists there. The Starcourt Mall, which was built later, isn't in the Upside Down. Changes to the town aren't reflected. But there's an alternative theory that's equally compelling. What if Will created it? Will was the first person taken into the Upside Down. He spent nearly a week there, alone, terrified, desperately wanting to go home. And he managed to survive in ways that don't entirely make sense. He communicated with Joyce through the lights. He hid from the Demogorgon. He stayed alive without food or water. What if his desire to go home was so strong that it literally shaped reality? What if the Upside Down became a twisted reflection of Hawkins on November 6th, because that was the last moment Will remembered feeling safe, the last normal day before everything went wrong? His psychic connection to that realm, the connection Vecna forced on him when he was flayed, might have been active from the very beginning. Will might have been unconsciously moulding the Upside Down around him, creating a dark mirror of the home he couldn't return to. It's tragic if true. The place that traumatized him might be partially his own creation, born from homesickness and fear. There's also the connection to November 6, 1959 that we just discussed. That's the date of the school play, the memory Vecna holds on to, the day that might be tied to his obsession with Joyce. The fact that Will was kidnapped exactly 24 years later, to the day, feels like Vecna deliberately choosing that date for symbolic reasons. He's methodical, he plans things carefully. Selecting November 6th as the day to begin his invasion wasn't random. It meant something to him personally, and now it means something to everyone in Hawkins. The date has become cursed. The anniversary of the day the gate opened, the day Will disappeared, the day everything changed. And in Volume 2, there's a very real possibility that November 6 will be significant again. Maybe that's when the final battle happens. Maybe Vecna's ultimate plan is timed to coincide with the anniversary. Full circle, just like the Duffer Brothers promised. Whatever the truth is about why November 6th matters, why the Upside Down is frozen on that specific day, Volume 2 absolutely needs to explain it. It's too central to the mythology to leave unanswered. And honestly, if they don't address it, fans are going to be proper annoyed. We've been waiting for this explanation for years. Vecna's not sitting around waiting to be defeated. Volume 1 makes it very clear he's been busy building up his defences, preparing for the inevitable moment when the heroes come for him. And honestly, what he's assembled is properly terrifying. The egg sacs are everywhere, lining the walls of the Upside Down, pulsing with whatever's growing inside them, ready to hatch at any moment. They're breeding more creatures, expanding the army, ensuring that even if you destroy 100 demogorgons, there are 1,000 more waiting to take their place. The hive mind itself is Vecna's greatest weapon. Every creature in the Upside Down is connected to his consciousness, operating as extensions of his will. They don't need orders. They don't need to communicate. They just know what he wants them to do, and they do it instantly, perfectly coordinated. Volume 1's attack on the Maxi military base showed exactly how outmatched humanity is against this kind of threat. The soldiers had guns, strategy, fortifications. They thought they were prepared. And they got absolutely slaughtered within minutes. Demogorgons came through the gates, in waves, fast and brutal, whilst demobats swarmed from above. The military's weapons barely slowed them down. It was a massacre, and that was just a fraction of Vecna's forces. The really scary part is how Vecna adapts. He's not mindlessly throwing monsters at problems. He's learning, adjusting tactics, targeting weaknesses. When the military tried to use flamethrowers, he sent creatures through different entry points to flank them. When they barricaded certain areas, he had the demogorgons tear through the walls instead. He's fought 11 before. He knows her strengths and limitations. He knows the party's strategies. He's had over a year since Season 4 to prepare for their next confrontation, and he spent that time very wisely. So how do the heroes possibly get through all of this? How do they reach Vecna when he's surrounded by an army of monsters that respawn faster than they can be killed? The answer is will. Will's ability to control the hive mind is the only advantage they have. He can turn Vecna's greatest strength into his greatest weakness. Every creature connected to that network is potentially under Will's influence. If Will can tap into the frequency strongly enough, if he can override Vecna's commands with his own, then the entire army turns against its master. That's what happened at the end of Volume 1. Those demogorgons were about to kill Mike, Lucas and Robin, and Will just reached out psychically and stopped them. Then he destroyed them effortlessly from a completely different location. Imagine that on a massive scale. Vecna sends his forces to attack, and Will just switches them off like flipping a circuit breaker. Or better yet, he turns them around and sends them back at Vecna himself. The egg sacs, the breeding program, the endless waves of monsters, none of it matters if Vecna loses control of the hive mind. And that's exactly what Will threatens to do. Of course, there's a cost. Using those powers clearly hurts Will. The nosebleed, the exhaustion, the psychic feedback. If he has to control hundreds or thousands of creatures simultaneously, whilst also fighting off Vecna's attempts to reclaim the network, it might destroy him, but it's their only shot. The military failed. Traditional combat failed. The only way to beat an army controlled by a hive mind is to hijack that hive mind and use it against itself. Vecna built the perfect weapon. He just didn't realise he'd already given someone else the key to it. Now let's rapid fire through some of the wilder theories floating around, because honestly, Stranger Things fans have thought of absolutely everything. There's the psychiatric ward theory, which suggests the entire show is happening inside someone's delusion. Everyone's a patient. The Upside Down is a shared hallucination, and the real horror is mental illness. I hate this theory. It's cheap, it invalidates everything, and it's the kind of twist that makes people throw things at their screens. Then there's the theory that all flayed people could return as an undead army. That includes Barb, Billy, everyone who's ever been killed by the Upside Down. They'd be resurrected under Vecna's control, forcing the heroes to fight their dead friends. Dark but possible, the jocks in Volume 1 were suspiciously violent. like beyond normal high school bully behaviour. Some fans think they're already infected or influenced by the Upside Down, which would explain why they're so vicious. Mr. Clark, the science teacher, has been dropping hints since season 1 about parallel universes and quantum mechanics. Some people think he's been predicting the ending this whole time through his lessons. As for how it actually ends, Will probably kills Vecna using his hive mind powers. 11 likely sacrifices herself to close all the gates permanently, bringing everything full circle to that season 1 ending. The Upside Down gets sealed off forever, but the cost is devastating. Some of the kids die, some survive, but are changed forever. Hawkins never fully recovers. It'll be bittersweet, epic and heartbreaking and perfect. Or I'm completely wrong, and the Duffer Brothers pull something none of us saw coming. Either way, Christmas Day can't come fast enough. And that, my dear friends, is where we'll end tonight's video. We've covered loads tonight. Will's powers and what they mean, the Mind Flayer versus Vecna debate, Max trapped in memories, who might die, Eddie and the K's mythology, the Thessal Hydra theory, Vecna's 12 vessels, Carly's return, the gates and that mysterious wall, Joyce's connection to it all, November 6th's significance, and so much wild speculation in between. In a future one, I'm definitely going to do a full reaction video once Volume 2 drops, and probably some deeper dives into whatever insane things the Duffer Brothers throw at us. There's also the finale on New Year's Eve that'll need its own discussion. Volume 2 releases on Christmas Day, December 25th, and the finale drops December 31st. We're so close to the end now, but until next time, stay safe and sweet dreams.